HMS Hood was a product of the First World War. The only ship of her class, the Hood was to prove to be the final battlecruiser constructed for the Royal Navy. The contract for the construction of the Hood was awarded to the John Brown & Co. Works at Clydebank, which had been responsible for the construction of the battlecruisers HMS Inflexible, Tiger and HMAS Australia, the battleship HMS Barham, as well as the liner RMS Lusitania. The immediate origins of the Hood can be traced back to a note drafted by the then Controller of the Navy, Admiral Sir Frederick Tudor, to the Director of Naval Construction, Sir Eustace Tennyson D'Eyncourt, in October 1915. In the note, Tudor requested a series of designs for an experimental battleship based on the Queen Elizabeth class battleships, which incorporated the latest advances in underwater protection and seakeeping. Between November 1915 and January 1916, D'Eyncourt oversaw the evolution of 5 designs, the most promising of which had a greatly enlarged hull and beam. The studies made by D'Eyncourt were rejected by the Commander-in-Chief of the Royal Navy's Grand Fleet, Admiral Sir John Jellicoe, in a lengthy memorandum. As part of his rejection of D'Eyncourt's studies, Jellicoe pointed out that while the Grand Fleet had a marked superiority over the German High Seas Fleet, it did not then have an answer to the Imperial German Navy's 13.8-inch gun Mackensen-class battlecruisers, which were then under construction. In February 1916, 6 further designs were produced which were based on the earlier studies, highlighting an enlarged hull and beam in order to reduce draft, which then emphasized speed over protection. Of the 6 designs produced in February 1916, one was selected for further development, which in itself resulted in 2 further designs being produced in March of that year. The second of these designs, designated Design B, received approval from the Admiralty on the 7th of April 1916 and was upon which the ship that was to become HMS Hood was based. The design approved by the Admiralty was named the Admiral-class battlecruiser and was to be a class of 4 vessels. Ultimately, the Hood would be the only vessel of the class to be constructed, the other 3 vessels being laid down but later scrapped. The Hood was a large warship. At the time of her construction, she was the largest warship ever constructed for the Royal Navy, and when launched would be the largest ship in the world. It has often been said that the keel of HMS Hood was laid down as the battlecruisers of Admiral David Beattie's Battlecruiser Squadron sailed into action at Jutland. This is nothing more than a legend. Work did not begin on ship number 460, as she was referred to, until the 1st of September 1916. Lessons learned following the loss of the battlecruisers Indefatigable, Queen Mary and Invincible during the Battle of Jutland were incorporated into the design of the Hood. Revised design plans were drawn up and submitted by D'Eyncourt in early July 1916, which were accepted by the Admiralty in early August. The main design changes concerned armour protection. Belt armour was increased from 8 to 12 inches, which was to be angled, providing the equivalent of 15 inches of horizontal armour. Armour over the barbettes was increased where a 460-foot long bulge packed with steel tubing was included, which offered protection against torpedoes. Nevertheless, debate on the ship's armour arrangement would continue through 1918. HMS Hood was launched at 1:05 on the 22nd of August 1918 by Lady Hood, the widow of Rear Admiral Horace Hood, who had been killed aboard HMS Invincible at Jutland. Having been launched, fitting out work began, which was completed in December 1919. The Hood has an overall length of 860 feet 7 inches, maximum beam of 104 feet 2 inches, and was 95 feet at the waterline. At the same time, she had a draft of 32 feet. Her armament consisted of 8 15-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, a weapon which would be fitted and utilised aboard British capital ships between 1915 and 1959. The 15-inch guns that were fitted to HMS Hood were the same as those fitted to the Queen Elizabeth-class battleships. Where the two differed, however, were in the gun mounts. The Queen Elizabeth-class battleships used the BL 15-inch Mark I, which had been specifically designed for the class in order to counter the new generation of Imperial German Navy dreadnoughts. HMS Hood, by contrast, had her Mark I guns housed in a unique mounting. This was referred to as the Mark II and incorporated a number of design improvements which allowed the guns to be elevated to 30 degrees. These improvements included flash doors in the gun loading hoist and telescopic sights, among other improvements. Hood was the only vessel to have Mark I guns fitted in the specifically designed Mark II housing. She was capable of firing a salvo every 30 seconds and could fire a shell weighing 1,920 pounds over a distance of 17.4 miles. As a secondary armament, the Hood was equipped with 12 5.5-inch guns which were mounted along the upper deck and on the forward shelter deck. As a defence against aircraft, the ship was fitted with 8 high-angle 4-inch anti-aircraft guns. In addition to her guns, the Hood was also equipped with 2 submerged torpedo tubes located below the waterline just forward of A turret and 4 above-water tubes parallel with the main mast. The torpedo tubes were divided evenly to port and starboard. Following being fitted out, the Hood was towed down the River Clyde on the 9th of January 1920 to Greenock, from where she sailed to conduct her first trials off the Isle of Arran. Official sea trials began on the 8th of March 1919 off the Isle of Arran. During the sea trials, Hood attained a speed of 32.07 knots, giving her the distinction of not only being the largest ship in the world, but also as being the most powerful in the world by some margin. Following sea trials, HMS Hood was commissioned into service with the Royal Navy on the 29th of March 1920. She became the flagship of the Royal Navy's Battlecruiser Squadron on the 18th of May 1920. The final cost for the British government for the construction of the Hood was £6,025,000, the equivalent of over £2.7 billion today. The end of 1920 saw the Hood embark on her first official voyage when she departed Portland with HMS Tiger and 9 destroyers for a cruise of Scandinavia. Exercises with the fleet and cruises to the Mediterranean followed in 1921. In July 1922, Hood was selected alongside HMS Repulse to represent the Royal Navy at the centennial celebrations of Brazilian independence in Rio de Janeiro. Hood and Repulse departed Devonport on the 14th of August 1922 and made their way south, arriving in Rio on the 3rd of September. En route, Hood crossed the equator for the first time. At Rio, a ceremonial march was held through the city ahead of sporting competitions and a foretaste of things that were to come during the Empire Cruise. In late 1914, the first Sea Lord, Admiral of the Fleet John Jackie Fisher, commenced the construction of a huge fleet of specialised craft for his long-held plan for an invasion of the Baltic. The main vessels of this fleet were to be armed with heavy guns, be able to retain a high speed, and possess a shallow draft. The battlecruisers of the Renown class were to be the first manifestation of this design theory. The requirements reached the Director of Naval Construction on the 14th of December 1914. The proposed design was to have a speed of 32 knots and be armed with 6 15-inch guns in 3 twin turrets. On the 21st of December 1914, the dimensions of the new vessels were decided upon, whereupon Fisher requested that modifications be made. In the meantime, he wrote to Admiral Jellicoe and requested that the Commander-in-Chief of the Grand Fleet write back a casual letter pointing out the requirements for more battlecruisers. Jellicoe, for his part, was happy to do so, and cabinet approval was forthcoming the following day, and a model quickly produced to be inspected by Fisher. On the 28th of December, such was the pace at which Fisher worked, the Director of Naval Construction was informed that the model was approved and that the design should be started at once. With the design approved, Fisher went out of his way to ensure that the ships were at sea in the shortest possible time frame. 15 months was the time that he insisted upon from the laying of the keel to commissioning of the ships. To facilitate this incredible demand, it was decided that the machinery of HMS Tiger would be duplicated as far as possible, with additional boilers being incorporated into the design. contract for the construction of the second ship of the Renown class, which was to be HMS Repulse, was awarded to the John Brown & Co. Works at Clydebank. By the 21st of January 1915, enough information had been supplied to John Brown & Co. to allow the shipyard to construct the midships portion of the ship to the turn of the bilge, and to prepare the main structural drawings. The keel of the ship was laid down on the 25th of January. A little less than a year later, on the 8th of January 1916, the Repulse was launched and fitting out work commenced before the ship was completed and formally commissioned into service on the 18th of August 1916. As completed, the Repulse had an overall length of 794 feet 2 inches, a beam of 90 feet 1.75 inches, and a draft of 27 feet. She displaced 27,600 tons, or 32,740 tons at deep load. Capable of attaining 31.5 knots, the ship was armed with 6 15-inch guns in 3 twin turrets. Supplementing the main armament, the ship was equipped with a secondary armament of 17 4-inch guns in 5 triple and 2 single mounts, along with 2 torpedo tubes, 1 to port and 1 to starboard. The ship's armour protection consisted of belt armour, which varied between 6 and 3 inches in thickness, and deck armour between 1 and 2.5 inches. Sea trails in the Atlantic led to the discovery that the ship's design was weak forward, with Atlantic rollers bending the deck forwards, causing it to sink inwards, leading to additional pillars being added to strengthen the forward hull. The funnels of both the Repulse and her sister ship, Renown, were altered post-construction. Both ships had originally been fitted with squat funnels, in keeping with contemporary designs of the era, but this was found to create difficulties in which funnel smoke hampered fire control and made the bridge untenable at times. Both ships subsequently had their forward funnels raised by 6 feet in order to rectify these issues. It was the lack of armour protection which was the greatest cause for concern, however, particularly so soon after the Battle of Jutland. In October 1916, both the Renown and Repulse were condemned by Jellicoe, who recommended that both ships be immediately sent for modifications. HMS Repulse sailed to Rosyth, where between the 10th of November 1916 and the 29th of January 1917, she was fitted with an additional 500 tons of horizontal armour over her decks, magazines and steering gear. In late September 1917, the Repulse underwent another minor refit which saw Carley rafts fitted along with a 12-foot rangefinder tower on the roof of the foretop. Repulse became the first capital ship of the Royal Navy to be fitted with a flying-off platform, when an experimental one was fitted atop B turret. This was followed by the fitting of another platform atop Y turret in October of that year. All of the changes that the Repulse and Renown underwent required frequent dockyard visits, and it was not long before the two ships were rechristened, refit and repair by the sailors of the Grand Fleet. During 1917, the Admiralty became increasingly concerned about German efforts in the North Sea to sweep paths through British-laid minefields intended to restrict the actions of the High Sea Fleet. A preliminary raid conducted by light forces on the 31st of October destroyed 10 German vessels and prompted the Admiralty to launch a large operation to destroy German minesweepers and their escorting light cruisers. Based on intelligence reports, the Admiralty decided on the 17th of November to allocate 2 light cruiser squadrons, the 1st Cruiser Squadron, covered by the 1st Battlecruiser Squadron, and the battleships of the 1st Battle Squadron to the operation. The result would be the Second Battle of Heligoland Bight. The battle began around 7:30 a.m. when lookouts aboard HMS Courageous sighted German vessels. The German admiral in command, Hans Hermann Ludwig von Reuter, in command of 4 light cruisers and 8 destroyers, advanced towards the British while the minesweepers withdrew. The battle developed into a stern chase as the German forces withdrew to the southeast at high speed behind smokescreen. As the German ships withdrew to the southeast under the cover of a smokescreen, they came under fire from the 1st Cruiser, 1st Light Cruiser and 6th Light Cruiser Squadrons. HMS Repulse was detached from the 1st Battlecruiser Squadron to close the range and to engage. Around 10 am, Repulse briefly engaged the light cruiser Königsberg and scored a single hit which damaged all 3 of the ship's funnels, sparked a fire, and caused a reduction in speed to 17 knots. Shortly thereafter, the German battleships Kaiser and Kaiserin were sighted, whereupon the British broke off the pursuit with the Repulse covering the withdrawal. During the course of the battle, Repulse fired 45 15-inch shells. Present at the surrender of the High Seas Fleet at Scapa Flow on the 21st of November 1918, the Repulse began a major refit at Portsmouth on the 17th of December. The refit was intended to drastically improve the ship's armour protection, increasing the belt armour to 9 inches and deepening the torpedo bulges along the lines of those fitted to HMS Ramillies. 3 30-foot rangefinders were also added along with 8 torpedo tubes in twin mounts on the upper deck, while the flying-off platforms were removed. Recommissioned into service on the 1st of January 1921, the following year the Repulse accompanied HMS Hood to Rio de Janeiro to partake in the centenary celebrations of Brazilian independence. The lead ship of her class of light cruisers, HMS Danae, was laid down on the 11th of December 1916 at the Armstrong Whitworth shipyard at Walker on Tyneside. Armed with 6-inch guns, the Danae class was based on the preceding C-class cruisers, but featured a hull which was lengthened by 20 feet to accommodate a 6th gun between the bridge and forefunnel, giving ships of the class an A, B, P, Q, X, Y arrangement. In addition to this, the twin torpedo tubes of the C-class were replaced by triple mounts, providing the Danae class with 12 torpedo tubes, the heaviest torpedo armament carried by cruisers anywhere in the world at the time. Named after Danae, the mother of Perseus in Greek mythology, HMS Danae was launched on the 26th of January 1918, commissioned later that year on the 22nd of July. Following being commissioned, the Danae was attached to the Harwich-based 5th Light Cruiser Squadron. As part of the 5th Light Cruiser Squadron, she partook in several patrols of the North Sea during the final months of the First World War. In October and November 1919, the ship saw service in the Baltic, where, alongside HMS Dragon and HMS Dauntless, she provided support to the forces of the Russian Republic, known as the Whites, during the Russian Civil War. In February 1920, HMS Danae was transferred to the 1st Light Cruiser Squadron of the Atlantic Fleet. Part of the original batch of 3 Danae-class cruisers ordered in September 1916 under the War Emergency Programme, HMS Dauntless was constructed by Palmer's Shipbuilding and Iron Company in Jarrow on Tyneside. Laid down on the 3rd of January 1917, the ship was launched on the 10th of April 1918. The ship was completed with a hangar to accommodate a float plane under the bridge, the compass platform being on top. The hangar would be removed in 1920. Commissioned into service on the 22nd of November 1918, the ship missed out on seeing action during the First World War. In 1919, HMS Dauntless was assigned to operate in the Baltic against Bolshevik revolutionaries and in support of White forces in the Russian Civil War. Following service in the Baltic, HMS Dauntless was attached to the West Indies station before being assigned to the Atlantic Fleet, as part of the 1st Light Cruiser Squadron. The third ship of the Danae class, ordered in September 1916, the contract for the construction of HMS Dragon was awarded to the Scots Shipbuilding and Engineering Company at Greenock. The keel was laid down on the 24th of January 1917, and the ship was launched on the 29th of December 1917, although it was not until the 10th of August 1918 that the ship was commissioned at Harwich Dockyard. Like HMS Dauntless, the Dragon was completed with a hangar to accommodate a floatplane beneath the bridge. Attached to the 5th Light Cruiser Squadron, HMS Dragon saw service in the North Sea, and on the 9th of November 1918 engaged German seaplanes off Heligoland Bight. Following the ending of hostilities, in August 1919, HMS Dragon escorted HMS Renown to Canada as the latter transported the Prince of Wales on a royal tour. Between the 13th of August and 17th of August 1919, Dragon embarked the Prince of Wales and took him to St John's, Newfoundland, and then to Halifax, where he re-embarked aboard the Renown. Returning to Britain in September, Dragon formed part of the task force which provided assistance to Latvian and Estonian forces operating against Bolshevik and the German Free Corps forces. While forming part of the British intervention forces, on the 17th of October, Dragon was hit by 3 shells from a shore battery, which resulted in the deaths of 9 crew members, while 5 others sustained wounds as the ship operated against German forces attacking Riga. From 1920, the ship operated as part of the 1st Light Cruiser Squadron attached to the Atlantic Fleet. HMS Delhi was one of 3 Danae-class cruisers ordered in July 1917. Laid down at the Armstrong Whitworth Yard in Elsick, Newcastle upon Tyne, on the 29th of October 1917, the ship was launched on the 23rd of August 1918. The fitting outwork saw the cruiser provided with flying off platforms aft for wheeled aircraft. The fitting outwork lasted into the following year, with Delhi not being completed and commissioned until July 1919, too late to see action during the First World War. Following the completion of her sea trials, HMS Delhi was attached to the 1st Light Cruiser Squadron as part of the Atlantic Fleet, during which time she worked up. While part of the 1st Light Cruiser Squadron, Delhi was dispatched to the Baltic as part of the British interventionist forces engaged in the Russian Civil War. Following service in the Baltic, Delhi returned to Britain. In July 1917, HMS Danae was laid down on the 5th of November 1917 at the Armstrong Whitworth Works at Elsick. Launched on the 19th of November 1918, 8 days following the armistice, she was christened Dunedin, a Scottish Gaelic name for the capital of Scotland, anglicised as Edinburgh. The ship has so far been the only ship of the Royal Navy to be named Dunedin, while 7 vessels have carried the name Edinburgh. Following being launched, HMS Dunedin was fitted out at Hawthorne Leslie and Company at Hebburn on Tyneside, before proceeding to Devonport Royal Dockyard, where she was commissioned on the 13th of September 1919. Following working up, in October 1920, HMS Dunedin was dispatched alongside 3 other vessels to assure the protection of workers unloading munitions in the free city of Danzig, modern-day Gdansk, intended for Polish separatist forces. HMAS Adelaide was a modified version of the Chatham subclass of 10-class light cruisers, armed with 9 6-inch guns, a 3-inch anti-aircraft gun, a 12-pounder field gun, 2 21-inch torpedo tubes, and 2 depth-charge chutes. The ship had an overall length of 462 feet 6.5 inches, a beam of 149 feet 9.5 inches, and a draft of 19.66 feet. Powered by Parsons turbines, Adelaide had a maximum speed of 25 knots. Laid down at the Cockatoo Island dockyard in Sydney on the 20th of November 1915, HMAS Adelaide was launched on the 27th of July 1918 by Lady Helen Munro Ferguson, the wife of Sir Munro Ferguson, the Governor-General of Australia. Following the launching of the hull, the fitting out work and completion encountered severe delays due to the loss of important forgings for the turbines and other machinery parts which were lost as a result of enemy action. The lost forgings and equipment could not be constructed in Australia at the time, and, owing to wartime conditions, replacement parts could not be immediately dispatched, taking 2 years to reach Sydney. In addition to this, based on wartime experiences, it was decided to incorporate extensive modifications into the Adelaide, which further delayed the ship's completion. Such was the length of time taken to fit out and complete Adelaide, she was nicknamed HMAS Long Delayed. Adelaide was finally commissioned into service with the Royal Australian Navy on the 5th of August 1922. Following being commissioned, Adelaide underwent a brief period of sea trials and working up off Jervis Bay. Declared operational, Adelaide spent the period from her commissioning until February 1924 operating on standard duties and conducting exercises throughout the Australia station. Between February and mid-April 1924, Adelaide was taken in hand for a brief refit before joining the Special Service Squadron. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more updates, like and share. You can also help to support the channel at Patreon. Details are in the description box below.